pleasant good morning to you, sir.
Good
I'm
morning, Bill.
Good morning indeed. I'm with Dr. Eric Palmer, Chair of Communication and Associate Professor here at SOU. And Dr. Palmer teaches social media, visual communication, and media entrepreneurship. Thank you for taking time out of a very busy schedule to come in and be a part of this.
I'm sure. Thank you for inviting me.
I have some questions that, of course, I'd like to jump into, but I first want to know a little bit about you. Where are you from? How did you get to SOU? How did you become involved in what you're doing right now? The social media, how did that become a part of your world?
Sure. Um, well, yeah, there's a lot wrapped up in that question.
I bet there
Um,
is.
I'm, I'm from Texas originally. I have my undergraduate degree from Texas State University in San Marcos, Texas, and I got a master's degree in photojournalism from the University of Texas, both a long time ago, and then moved to Portland, Oregon in about 1995, and so I've been in Oregon ever since. And along the way, I went ahead and got a PhD in journalism from the University of Oregon. Uh, so my academic background is 3 degrees in journalism.
Wow.
I often advise folks not to do what I did in that regard, um, it but maybe people should do what I did because it worked out okay for me. I don't know if I would necessarily recommend it for most folks. But in between and among all that education, I had kind of a professional career. I was a technical writer in the software industry for a number of years. I ran a sports news website called Trackwire Online for a few years. I operated and ran a commercial stock photography agency called Vico Images for a few years. And then, right around 2010 or so, I kind of hit a moment where um, it was a good time for a transition point from all of those kinds of things. I had a PhD in hand. Uh, uh, I went and applied for a few academic positions and got a few interviews and got an offer from SOU. And it was an offer that kind of fit what I needed at the time. And I think I kind of fit what SOU needed at the time. And so that was in 2012 that I started at SOU, and here I still am.
Here we are. Well, we're glad to have you. I noticed in reviewing your your I guess vitae is the correct term, that you recently had a Fulbright. Were granted a Fulbright and were out of the country. Would you like to tell us about where you went and what you were doing down there? Sounds fascinating.
Sure, thank you. We Yes, I was a Fulbright U.S. scholar in 2019-20 for my scheduled sabbatical year from SOU, and so I applied for the Fulbright and was successful in getting an assignment to the University of Ghana. So my family and I moved to Accra in kind of the southwest coast of Africa for what was intended to be 10 months in Ghana. It was cut short by the pandemic crisis a bit. We were there for about 7 months. So we had a pretty good 7 months in Accra. And my main roles there in terms of the Fulbright program, I was helping to instruct some courses in um, multimedia journalism in the communication studies program at the University of Ghana. And I was also conducting some research, undertook a research project related to the practice of professional photojournalism in Ghana. Um, excuse me, and I'm continuing that research now. I'm generating some conference papers and that type of scholarly activity out of the work I did there. And then it wasn't totally expected, but I also connected with an interesting little community of kind of comics nerds in Ghana, and I'm working on a little bit of scholarship around kind of comics culture and comics fandom in Africa as well. So looking forward to an upcoming conference presentation of my first kind of writing about that topic.
I'm curious, as kind of hit an interest of mine, what comics might be popular in Ghana?
Well, first of all, anything we like here is something that is well liked in Africa. So
I
the
didn't know if it
fandoms there
translated culturally.
are super strong in Marvel Cinematic
Mhm.
Universe, Marvel and DC Comics, um, um, superheroes, and those kind of cultural
Sure.
artifacts generally. Also, a great interest in Japanese genres. So manga and anime
Mhm.
are big in Ghana.
Sure.
Um, and animation, Disney, all of those things are very popular. But what was interesting about meeting the folks that I met, and what I'm finding more and more as I uh, kind of dig into what's going on with comics in Africa, is that um, in the last 10 years or so, there's emerged kind of a fandom community around comics. And it's a fandom community that's really interested in African content, really interested in creating more and having more African specific content. So there's a little bit, I wouldn't quite say huge, but there's a nice bump or a nice growth in publishers, independent creators, creating superheroes and other genres of comics that are set in Africa, have African characters, tell stories that are kind of that resonate with African audiences in a slightly different kind of style or vernacular from American comics or global comics. And so there's both, I think, some really tremendous economic opportunities there for those creators because Africa's a big market
Mhm.
and a growing market, and because there's a ton of opportunity there. And I think there's also interesting creative opportunities to express a kind of authentic African voice in media, and the creators and the fans there are really aware of that. They really want to express an African vision for the work that they're doing and they're enjoying. And so it's really, even though I'm almost entirely an outsider to all that, it's really interesting to see and admire what they're taking on.
Yeah, it's fascinating to see that an international genre, if you will, can spark that creative local development. And you're seeing the voice of that culture or those people included and actually expanding out. I think that's great.
It's great fun.
Great fun.
Yeah.
All right, let's come on back to the United States. Looking at what you teach is all the things that I've always really enjoyed. Journalism, uh, I see you're in a group. Let's see, I marked it. Fellowships in Disruptive Journalism Education, and convened with a cohort of disruptive fellows in both 17 and 18 and various conferences. Journalism has changed. I am, in fact, embarrassed today to say I used to be a journalist. People look at, it's like, fake news, blah, blah, or their readers. There's the idea, if I did what I see being done when I started, my editor would have fired me on the spot.
Right.
So I, so with that said, it looks like you're doing some really good things in journalism. I'd like to hear a little bit about your take, both on my angst and on the profession in general.
Sure, definitely doing, doing the best I can. I'm kind of one scholar, one person, at a relatively small institution, in a relatively kind of isolated community. But having said all that, um, the most important thing about journalism right now is this dialectic between the challenges of journalism and the opportunities that are presented. And the challenges, we pretty well understand. The political landscape is tough. The economic landscape, the business models are really tough. All of those things are really challenging. On the flip side of that, A, the work is important. B, when you hit the right formula, people care about it, and the work is very, very rewarding. And C, and this is where that kind of that disruptive thing maybe comes in a little bit, or that kind of memory of what our editors from decades past might have not well responded to what's going on in the landscape of journalism right now. But at the same time, there's lots of opportunities there. There's the potential to build digital products for journalism, digital platforms for journalism. There's opportunities there that we haven't fully solved, kind of in a predictable way, how to accomplish that. But there are instances where organizations have, entrepreneurial organizations have spun up and done great things in their communities or in their beats. And there's great opportunities, I think, similarly, back when I got that first degree of journalism way back when, the idea of becoming a reporter or a journalist for a local newspaper, that was a long haul to do.
Oh, yes.
It's like, hey, the first thing, we're going to start you writing obituaries, and maybe after a while, you'll be able to move on to something else. The landscape for young people is very different today. If you're a person that a young person, or maybe a not so young person, but young at heart, we might say, if you're such a person that can come in and both do the right things journalistically in terms of storytelling and fact checking and um, and the social commitments, the social responsibilities of journalism, and then at the same time be very adept and thoughtful about how to use all the media platforms, how to optimize the content to be most accessible on the platforms, all of those kinds of kind of skills, 21st century communication skills. Folks that can do that have tremendous success in journalism, and don't have to wait in line the way that junior journalists might have had to have done way back in the past. So I think there's tremendous opportunity there, and that's what I'm at SOU to do, is to say, even in this relatively small school, this relatively small community, we can be at the cutting edge of what's happening in journalism, and we can help students move themselves along if that's the direction that they want to go.
Very good. Nice.
That's the goal.
Notice you're also active in social media uh, and have some courses along that area. I'm I have reached the point, and I think it happened about 6 months prior to the election. I've dropped Facebook, I've dropped Twitter, I've dropped Instagram. I have just totally unplugged because the environment, in my opinion, was totally toxic. I received no value. Um, Bots, trolls, threats. I have a viewpoint politically that gets me threatened periodically. Uh, has social media basically just become this quicksand tar pit thing, or is there light at the end of the tunnel? Can we rein in Facebook's data mining to the point that it's tolerable, or you're not followed around the net by a bot?
I, I'm more optimistic than pessimistic. I nearly always am about these kind of larger cultural trends. Uh, so I think a light at the end of the tunnel seems like a reasonable thing to hope for. But obviously, being optimistic doesn't mean that we don't acknowledge the risks and challenges that are presented to us right now. I think that there's two things. One is that and Facebook's a great example. Um, I think we've reached the point one way or another. Many people that are on Facebook are kind of in the circumstance that you just described. It's either a very toxic environment for them, or at least it's not a very rewarding environment. Um, and I think what we've seen in Facebook so far is that they've been very resistant to change their ways. They feel like they're doing okay economically with what they're doing right now. But I would argue that, the biggest strategic threat, the thing that's going to make us say in 10 years, Facebook, whatever happened to them, is, if they are not ultimately able to respond to kind of the perception of so many of people that are on the platform, that it's either very toxic or at least not very rewarding to be there. Excuse me a second. But I'll also say, and there's a fair amount of kind of conversation, such as you've described in your own experience, where folks are saying things like, social media is dead, or social media is, irredeemably toxic, or, social media is, whatever it is that people don't want to be involved in anymore. And they say, well, that's the end of that. But I also disagree with that perspective, in the sense that what's not going away is that we're all hungry for connection. And we're all going to do a lot of that connection through digital channels. I think that, that's not going to unwind in a certain sense. We're not very likely to ever be back to a situation where all of our kind of pleasurable, social, productive communication time is face-to-face or one-to-one personal experience. And so I'm quite, there will be other platforms, either the existing platforms will evolve, or there will be new platforms that have new ideas for how to build community, how to build a reasonable business out of it, because eventually it has to be profitable somehow.
Exactly. Yeah.
And how to mitigate all of these challenges and risks that we see.
It's my hope as well. It's not like I want Facebook to go away. I'm not some old curmudgeon sitting here. Get off my lawn.
Right.
And I think we're on the right track. I think the market, hopefully, is going to drive, like when everybody starts boycotting string cheese, all of a sudden string cheese changes its formula and actually tastes like cheese instead of plastic. Hopefully that can be a force, although I don't think we're going to see anything overnight.
Right. Well, and certainly, my perception is that Facebook in particular isn't really grasping the risk that they face, isn't really ready to respond to that. And so, again, like I said, I think the long-term outcome of that is either that they will be forced to change by economic circumstances because people just don't want to mess with it anymore, or they'll fail. They'll be marginalized, and something else will kind of step into that place.
Become MySpace.
Right, exactly.
I noticed on your website, and I'm going to post the link to that with your permission with this interview. I think it's great.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you. I noticed the photography. Now, I have been a photographer my entire life, and my son and I had this interesting generational discussion. He took up photography. He had my old 35s, he had my old 2 1/4s, and he was going out doing photography and just doing very well. And he walked away. He said he's tired of seeing people with a cell phone come up and get a better quality picture than you can get with your 35 and your depth of field and your setting your focus and your the whole routine. I'd be interested because there's some very good work. I like the fact you can just take your cell phone and go snap and you're going to get an image. And then I look at Moonrise over New Mexico by Ansel Adams, which I found out, much to my chagrin, was very manipulated from an 8 by 10 negative. Uh, I think there's room for both, but I'm curious, as someone who's involved in the profession, what do you think of photography, both for catching the moment, like the moment of truth in those old World War II shots, and sports today, where the person's just catching the ball? Equipment driving content, or is content better because of changes in equipment?
Yeah, let's see. Let me consider where to start with that, because there's a lot of complexity implied in there. I think that, I mean, the first thing is, the first thing we have to consider is, or what I'll start with is talking a little bit about the curriculum that we actually have in the communication program at SOU. So we basically have, our program, years ago actually had a major in photojournalism that was very robust. That was discontinued years before I came to SOU myself. But we certainly had a great tradition of instructing in photojournalism from before my time. And then, we still offered some photojournalism courses, but they didn't enroll very well. And so we weren't consistently able to offer them. So I redesigned and reinvented a couple of photography courses that are aligned with what I saw to be kind of the real needs of our students. And the courses are COM 214 mobile image making. So that's a mobile phone photography course. And then COM 344 media photography. So that's a DSLR photography course. So not a film course, but a little bit closer to the craft experience that you were kind of referring to when you were talking about those film cameras. And the thing that I try to accomplish in these courses, which will hopefully also address some of the points that you kind of framed in your question. The courses are trying to do two things. One is they're trying to think of photography instruction in the classic way that it was taught in film, but updated and adapted to digital circumstances. And so trying to motivate students to approach photography with a real sense of craft, approach photography thinking through the frame of storytelling, how they collect lots of pictures that are put together into stories, those kinds of kind of higher order skill sets, even at a higher order above just, how to do the shutter and how to do exposure and all of those kinds of things. So there's a tradition that's expressed in those courses, but there's also a goal of being very current, being about what's happening in photography right now and what the needs of photography clients are right now. And so that in that sense, we get a little bit more to the understanding the kind of more casual photographic vocabulary that we've gotten used to and that our students have really gotten used to, because that's the experience they have of photography in social media. And so embracing social media, embracing the way that people mostly experience photography now is through social media and other digital platforms. But also realizing that things that look easy are in photography and in many things are often deceptively difficult. And so to have that casual vernacular that tells a story that, raises emotion, sometimes that's we don't always respect the amount of work it takes to achieve that. And so trying to capture all that is, what we hope to do in these photography courses. Um, and then well, last little goal is also to acknowledge, few of our students are actually planning to be professional photographers, but by teaching them photography, we also teach them to be better at the other things that they do want to do. A lot of our students want to be in things like social media marketing, digital marketing, social media strategy, these kinds of career paths. Sometimes design students will come our way, and so all of those are disciplines where students have to work with visual storytelling as part of that work, as part of that profession. And so making them better adept at visual storytelling through photography is another thing that we try to accomplish in those courses. So again, it's not precisely an answer to the question that you asked, but I think it kind of gets at the points that
It does. Yes. Thank
get
you.
my response to the landscape of photography today and the way what we try to do to accomplish good photography with our students at SOU.
Sounds like an excellent approach. Thank you. Talking about SOU, because as we start winding down our time, I like to ask you, you've told us about the offerings at SOU. If I was a person considering this, what would I need to know about the communications program that you're a part of, or as the chairperson for the department, about communications overall at SOU? I find it quite impressive personally.
Sure, thank you. And I think it's, for the way I say it is, I think both SOU itself and our program in particular play way above our weight class. And
Really
so
do.
we have a relatively small faculty, and but also a lot of innovation happening in our program, a lot of opportunities that are for courses and resources that are not necessarily available even to somewhat larger institutions than ours. I'll single out the Digital Media Center in that conversation, and so the media production facilities that we have there um, are are uh, there's a great studio, there's a great computer lab, there's a great we have a great array of DSLRs and video cameras and other equipment that students can check out. So that's an underrated asset of SOU. And one thing that I've mentioned before, for example, the production facilities we have there are pretty much better than anything in Ghana, right?
I have been over there. We used to record there
Yeah,
until COVID, and I am very impressed. They've got some green screen. They've got I call it the cone of silence. I don't know exactly what it does, but it looks really cool. Hangs from the ceiling. There's some excellent people and excellent work over there. I'm very, I'm, I'm pleased to tell people that we're a part of that.
a lot of great stuff in the DMC. So that was a lead up to talking about the program itself.
Mhm.
I think the main thing folks need to know, we have three primary disciplines of study within the communication program. We have communication studies, so which entails small group, interpersonal communication, public speaking, those categories of courses and activities. We have social media and public engagement, which is primarily where I'm aligned, and that's basically our take on journalism, public relations, and advertising for the 21st century. So what kinds of interdisciplinary kind of content skills do students need to move into productive careers in that area and to be productive citizens as well? And then, of course, we also have our digital cinema major. It was a concentration, but recently launched as a major, and so that's again our take on a 21st century production oriented film experience. And so we have students that cross over the boundaries of those three categories quite a bit, and so that's always a great thing to see and a great opportunity for students. To get back to kind of your question, I mean, the big question for students that might be interested in our program is, first of all, which of those three things are they most interested in, and which do they want to, kind of declare as their concentration or their major, uh, and then and then hopefully what they're here for, and certainly what they get, is a sense of the small school innovation in higher education that we've come up with. And so we're, there's still institutions, probably not so many after the last year, but there's still institutions around the country, maybe a lot of institutions and programs that were not very digitally adept um, a year or two ago. And now maybe a lot of them are. That wasn't the situation with us. I mean, we fully embrace all the digital technologies that are entailed in all of the disciplines that we practice at our program. And our goal is to help students kind of seamlessly move across and among the boundaries of kind of professional practice, navigating life in professional life in digital platforms and digital spaces, which we do a lot of work in, and then that in-person thing is still essential to what we do, getting folks kind of working together and collaborating um, in ways that we hope kind of simulate what they're going to encounter in the world after graduation.
Outstanding. The final question and I always like to leave our guests with is, where do you see both yourself and SOU 5 years down the road in relation to the world that you're currently populating?
Right. Oh, yeah. That's it's a doozy for a last question, but I think that the in terms of the institution, um, again, I'm optimistic.
Mhm.
Um, we uh, again at SOU generally, and especially in the communication program, we have a set of challenges in front of us that are related to, kind of the realities of enrollment and demographics and state funding and some of those kinds of things. And those are all hard challenges that we're going to need to rise up to. But also, we've got tremendous capacity to do that. We have a lot of exciting young new faculty at SOU, and so that's fantastic. We have a culture that, by the standards of higher ed, is really very nimble and flexible and open, and we can see how that contributes to our ability to come up with, kind of new programs, new courses, new ideas, much more quickly and rapidly. Well, quickly and rapidly are the same word basically. But we've got, all kinds of things that are popping up. That we've got a new music industry certificate
Ah,
that some of our courses are entailed in. We've got a relatively recent, healthcare administration program that the communication participates in. We've just launched a couple of new certificates in one in professional social media, and three more in digital cinema. So we're constantly um, working on new ideas, both at an institutional level and a program level, that help to deliver value to students and help to attract new students to SOU. And um, it with the COVID hiccup, it's hard to understand precisely where we are in terms of measuring our success at doing those things. But I think my optimism says that in 5 years, these things will be paying off for the institution and helping us to strengthen both our fundamentals and our kind of reputation, or our public perception as being a great place to come and get an innovative education.
being responsive and adaptive has never hurt anyone. I think that's an excellent path.
We sure try. Um,
Well, is there anything that I've freight trained through that you felt you wanted to expand on, or have we pretty well checked off all the boxes?
I think we got all the good stuff.
All right.
Right. Anytime I can have a good public platform to rant for a little bit, how the assets that we have in our program and in our institution, I'm pleased to take advantage of that opportunity.
Well, Dr. Palmer, thank you for coming in today. I appreciate your time, and be safe out there, okay?
Oh,
Stay
you too.
healthy.
Thank you very much.